Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's session. My name's Belinda Gorman, and I am the Philanthropy Manager at Microsoft here in New Zealand. I'm really pleased this morning to be joined by Travis Barker from Stellar Consulting. We're here today to share with you some insight into how the cloud can really better serve organisations and individuals that are really trying to tackle some of today's biggest global problems. We will share a little bit about Microsoft's $1 billion commitment to ensuring that our cloud is available to serve the public good, and also help you understand the suite of cloud services that we have available for the non-profit sector. My own path to the technology sector is quite untraditional. So my early professional life was spent working for non-profit and humanitarian organisations in developing countries. I spent a number of years living between Mongolia and Vietnam, and I've had the privilege of working in our region, and in Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste, also in Laos. And it's really through those early experiences that really drew me to the industry, because I really believed that digital technology had a huge contribution to make in solving some really big problems. That has become even more evident since the advent of the cloud, and I'm especially excited about the opportunities that affords us. One really big challenge around the world today relates to water security. And for many years, the projects I worked on were water and sanitation projects in rural communities predominantly. Water scarcity affects about 80% of the world's population. So 80% of the world's population actually lives in areas that face the threat of water insecurity. It essentially means those populations face the threat of poor health, poor livelihoods, and really limited opportunities in terms of the production of their communities if those threats become real. In my own experiences, a day out in the projects, we would visit, often be travelling out to villages, and those trips used to take typically about 3 different forms of transport to get to any particular community. Some of the communities were only perhaps 30 kilometres from an urban centre, but it wasn't unusual that the villagers in those communities had never actually visited that urban environment because the difficulties related with transport. So in terms of delivering infrastructure, they were hugely problematic. Certainly building the infrastructure had its challenges, but I suggest some of the biggest challenges came once the engineers left a village and the water infrastructure had been laid. And those challenges really related to the ability of those communities to fix the infrastructure if it broke down. And I'm just about to show you a video that demonstrates for me, based on my early experiences, just how powerful the cloud is.
I grew up in rural parts of Kenya, which have quite high rates of poverty. In our family, we used to get on our bicycles, each of us carrying 3 jerrycans. So it would be like 3 or 4 people, me, my uncles, and my cousins. We will travel like 20 kilometers on a bicycle for that day to go look for water.
Over 4 out of 5 people in the world that don't have access to safe drinking water live in rural areas. This situation is particularly compounded in Africa, where hand pumps and rural water supplies often fail. And one of the newest technologies that's now emerged in terms of mobile solutions and cloud-based computing is allowing us to advance with innovative ways to address this problem. The REACH program is aiming to make 5 million poor people water secure in Africa and Asia.
Groundwater is one of the safest supplies of water in rural regions of Kenya. So being able to track the depth of the aquifer is critically important in being able to understand how healthy that water system is.
We may be familiar with the idea of using one's smartphone or smart devices to carry around with us and to use to monitor our own health. And the idea here was, well, can't we put some of those mobile health devices into the handle of a pump?
So the data is really interesting. When you see a raw accelerometry pot, you kind of get these curves of the actual motion of someone pumping. When the pump is deeper, the weight of the water that you're lifting is much larger, and so there will be more vibrations, whereas when the pump is shallower, you're lifting less water, and so there will be smaller vibrations.
Imagine you have multiple intelligent nodes. They're all transmitting data. You have to integrate data in a cloud-based system from data nodes across an entire region, tens of thousands of pumps in our case.
Initially, it used to take more than 30 days to repair a hand pump. But now, because we have this information, when a hand pump breaks down, we can repair them within less than 3 days, or sometimes even 48 hours. So that has enabled the villages to have better access to water. My hope and aspirations is to see this system making my village and other villages back in Kenya water secure and moving them out of poverty.
Microsoft's mission is really to empower every individual and every organisation on the planet to achieve more. And delivering on that mission starts with great technology, but we really understand that it doesn't end there, that too many of the benefits of technology have really yet to reach the individuals or organisations that need them the most. When the wording of our mission statement was revised recently, our Chief Executive, Satya Nadella, rebutted suggestions that it could be limited to fewer words. And he was very purposeful about Microsoft keeping the words every and on the planet in the mission statement. And as such, he renewed the company's commitment to ensuring that the benefits of technology and our efforts go into ensuring the most underserved communities are able to avail of those benefits. Microsoft's support of non-profit organisations is just one way that we are trying to bring that our organisational transformation to life and ensuring that it is really far-reaching. As the reach and capability of the cloud improve, we're starting to see non-profit organisations harness that potential, and it's really, really exciting. And it's why earlier this year, Microsoft committed to making available $1 billion in cloud resources to over 70,000 non-profit organisations in the next 3 years. Just about a month ago, we added Azure grants to the suite of products that are available to non-profit organisations, and I will talk you through those just a little bit later in the presentation. From Microsoft's perspective, non-profit organisations play a really important role in society. Here in New Zealand, their contribution is huge. We have a really sophisticated but also large non-profit community. We have over 27,000 charities now registered with the Charities Commission. These organisations, in many essence, I think, are really the fabric of New Zealand society. They've been established typically by passionate individuals many, many years ago to effect change in regards to a particular societal issue. In New Zealand, a lot of these organisations deliver services to our most vulnerable New Zealanders, and they essentially close gaps that the government struggle to. They range in size quite significantly from organisations like Plunkett, who operate from 300 locations across New Zealand and have 1,500 staff, to organisations that actually have no dedicated space and no employees. Already we are seeing that non-profits here in New Zealand are availing of the cloud. In fact, globally, when we look at it, New Zealand non-profits are some of the earliest adopters, but that adoption to date has focused quite strongly around productivity in the back office. There is a huge desire from non-profits to enable their workforce to be more mobile. They're heavily dependent on volunteers and want to ensure that they use them most productively. Increasingly, however, we are seeing organisations here in New Zealand extend that capability through different services to the work they do in the field. And I think probably one of the best examples of that is Plunkett. So Plunket have undertaken quite a major transformation in the last few years. Initially, it was very focused on productivity, and they've been experiencing some of those gains. But I'll again show you a little clip to give you an indication of some of the work they've been doing.
I'm Carla. I am a Plunket nurse in Northland. I work in the Whangarei area, and I'm one of the first nurses to use the electronic Plunket health record. Basically what that is that we're now using a tablet instead of the traditional paper-based documents. On a normal home visiting day, 50% of it probably was paperwork, whereas now with a tablet, that's all gone. My day's all set up on the tablet, ready to go. Everything that I need is on there. I just come in and get any resources and then off I go. A lot of my families are like, wow, you know, we get to have it first. Yeah, they're pretty excited about that for Northland, which is awesome.
The fact that there's a text reminder service is fantastic for me. The graphs that she can show me, like I can see her growth and her length and her head circumference straight away, so I can see that she's on track for her age and her growing.
It's a sign of the times. It's just brilliant. Certainly different from my day.
This can help us all as a community and help us interlink with our families so we've all got the information. I just see the big picture and I love what I see.
So as demonstrated in the video, I think Plunket were really motivated by achieving some productivity gains. They have nurses in the field who essentially support about 65,000 newborn to 5-year-olds every year, and they have a very mobile workforce. Until they implemented the EPHR, all of those nurses were inputting information on paper, which was, obviously causing some significant productivity challenges for the organisations. Plunket is an example of a number of non-profit organisations here in New Zealand that are starting to collect client data electronically. But that is still a relatively new scenario in the non-profit sector. I think today what gets us very excited about the new capabilities of the cloud is the way that we can unlock some of that to support non-profit organisations to really get better insight from the information that they hold, so that ultimately they can have better impact in the communities and for the individuals that they serve. On that basis, we have entered into some work of late to support the non-profit organisation in building that capability. And we've been really delighted to be able to partner with Stellar Consulting, a business intelligence specialist here in New Zealand, to really support us in that endeavour. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce Travis to the stage to share with you a little bit of insight into that work. Travis, I'm really sorry, don't use that as a guide.
Sure, thank you very much, Belinda. As Belinda has mentioned, Stellar Consulting has been involved with Microsoft in an endeavour around the using the public cloud for public good program. Our involvement stemmed from a call out to partners from Microsoft New Zealand back in March, where they had established a relationship with Stand and were looking for partners to front up essentially to wrap services around the program that they're pushing around the philanthropic endeavours. Stand is a really interesting case in that they are an organisation that are targeting our most vulnerable kids in our society. So those kids of the age range 5 to 12-year-olds, and essentially we're talking here the 1% or so of kids that are most vulnerable in our communities. Stand wrap programs around those kids to try and really make a difference to their lives and try and break that cycle. But of course they're a small organisation. They get their funding from the government through the Ministry of Social Development, and they're obviously limited in the resources that they have, and being able to push those resources out to as much as possible out to the front line. My organisation, Stellar Consulting, is a specialist data and analytics consultancy. We provide services typically to large-scale public and private organisations in New Zealand. So for us, Stand is quite a different beast. They wouldn't typically fit our customer profile, but it's very compelling for us to be able to demonstrate that we can take our industrial strength, if you like, solutions that we do for Tier 1 enterprise in New Zealand, and demonstrate that those solutions can really add value to smaller not-for-profit organisations like Stand. So to be able to partner with Microsoft to take their compute and their technology and wrap our services around it and make a difference to our most vulnerable kids is really compelling for us as an organisation. And an added benefit of that is that for our staff as well. When I put the word out to our staff who would like to be involved, I was inundated with people who wanted to be involved in that. So from an organisational perspective, we feel very honoured to be involved in this program. Before I dive into what we are doing with Stand, I think it's really important just to set a little bit of context around the environment in which Stand operate. So as with any organisation, the government is obviously pressured around the resources that it has available to push out to frontline services and to assist the organisations like Stand, the not-for-profit organisations, to push out frontline services and make a difference in our community. If you look at this quote from a speech from Bill English, it's pretty astounding when you think about the stats there. So the 10,000 most vulnerable people in our community cost over their lifetimes in the region of $6.5 billion. It's a large amount of money for essentially a very small portion of our population. Just to give you a little bit of context on that, it's about the same amount of money as would be spent on the 80% or so least vulnerable in our community. We're talking about 1% of 0 to 14-year-olds would fill that 10,000 number. So what is the government doing about that? Well, obviously there's financial benefits to be able to improve the services that are pushed out to the frontline, pushed out to the most vulnerable people through frontline services. But there's also societal benefits, obviously, to be gained from that, and I think that's the larger picture. So for those that are unfamiliar with what the government is doing in this space, there's an initiative called the IDI, or the Integrated Data Infrastructure, which has been hosted by Stats New Zealand. The IDI is an interesting concept. Bill English has introduced it as the data highway, if you've read any of his speeches. And the vision is that we can start to bring together those data sets from the various agencies, government agencies, operating across different sectors. And we can start to profile and understand what are the drivers behind the services and how effective are the services that are being driven out to people in the community. So it's a very, very interesting concept indeed. But at the end of the day, it's all about social investment, and the key thing is how do we use that data to best effect? How do we use that data to identify the most vulnerable people in our community first and foremost, and then how do we use that data to understand that services are actually being delivered effectively and that we're targeting the right areas with the limited resources that we do have. So just to give you an example of that, I'll use a bit of a left field example. The New South Wales Department of Finance, Service and Innovation has established a data and analytics centre themselves, which is essentially doing a very similar thing to what the New Zealand government is doing with Stats and the IDI. They're using data sets and often seemingly unrelated data sets to really understand how they can be more effective in the services that they provide. And the example often given is the New South Wales Fire Service. So the New South Wales Fire Service in Sydney responds to something in the region of 48,000 fire alarm calls, at which they need to send 2 trucks to every call over the course of the year. 97% of those calls are false alarms. That means that there is a lot of service going into essentially wastage, so sending the trucks out to calls that aren't actually fires. The New South Wales Finance and Innovation Department is using big data to understand how they can find the correlations. So, for example, the use of electricity information and identifying spikes in electricity which set off fire alarms is being used to identify and proactively identify false alarms. And instead of sending 2 trucks, they can now think about how they can send out perhaps a telephone call or a drone or another way of responding to those to confirm whether it's an actual fire or not. So how does this relate to STAND? Well, that's essentially what we are trying to do with the IDI and with data and analytics for STAND as well. How do we firstly identify those kids at risk? They already do a pretty good job at that through referrals. But how do we use the data that we gain or that we know about those individuals from the IDI and the information that these non-profits like STAND collect about their individuals to better direct and demonstrate the value that not-for-profits are adding to the community? And that's a really important piece when you think about the government has limited resources. It's wanting to work with non-profits that are actually making a difference to our community. So this is very important for non-profits, very important for STAND obviously as well. Here's some interesting analysis that's been done by Treasury over the IDI. What I'd like to focus on, and sorry if you can't read these, is this big red bubble here. Essentially what it's saying is that there are absolutely key indicators that will determine an individual's path in life. So if you have, in this case, for the 1% of our most vulnerable kids, if you tick 4 of these boxes, 4 of these 5 indicators, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to end up as a poor outcome in your life. And I'll focus on the biggest red box here, which is very interesting to me and alarming at the same time. And that's that these kids that are most at risk are growing up in households that have no formal qualifications, so they haven't gone through the education system and been successful in our education systems. And I picked that out because to me that suggests that we can do something about that. How do we break the cycle? How does an organisation like STAND help to break the cycle of intergenerational dependency on the state? That big red bubble suggests that 50% of that 1% of kids that are most vulnerable are grown up in a household with no qualifications. Imagine if we can capture those kids and bring them into a program that is going to help them get an education. We're starting to already break the cycle. So what does that mean for STAND, and what does that mean for the New Zealand government and the IDI? So for many organisations like STAND, they want to be they want to participate in the program and the data highway. They want to be part of that data highway. They want to be able to get insights out of that rich data set that exists. But for many of them, they don't have the technology, they don't have the funding, they don't have the skills to be able to be part of that initiative. So this is very important for us, that we can use technology like the Azure Cloud services and our own skill sets from an analytics perspective as an organisation to help not-profits benefit from the advantages of the insights that we can gain out of these kind of data sets. So we're helping them. The idea is that we can help them join the data highway, be part of that conversation, remain relevant to the government, and be able to demonstrate that they're adding value into our communities. So hopefully that provides you with a bit of context as to why we see this as a very valuable initiative. specifically around how we are harnessing the Azure cloud to make a difference. We are an analytics company, so obviously we're looking at how we can use Power BI in the first and foremost to improve the visualizations and improve the way that the organisation can use its resources and push resources out to the front line. But we're using an industrial strength approach. So we've got Azure Data Factory to do data ingestion out of their core case management system. In this case, it's a Penelope system. We're then using SQL database in Azure, platform as a service data storage repository to store that information, and then we're putting Power BI over the top to provide them management insights. So key for us is that there are shortcuts. You could potentially just throw Power BI, of course, throw Power BI over top of Penelope to get similar insights, but in doing so, you cut off your ability to start to integrate with the likes of IDI. So for Stan to be part of that data highway, it's really important that we can demonstrate that we can use cloud services, that we can open up data sets, that we can ingest and we can share data sets as well with the IDI. That's part of the incentive, and of course also in the future being able to ingest other data sets as they come online as well. So we can enrich that visualization, we can enrich that understanding for the organisation. So we're moving from a very operational perspective, so their case management system where they look at an individual, what's going on, what are the events associated with an individual, to a management perspective where they can start to look at the aggregate. What are the outliers? How do we identify the exceptions in performance, and how then can we direct our resources to those exceptions to ensure that kids aren't falling through the net? Before I go into any more detail, I'll just highlight the Microsoft Trust Centre. So there's been a lot of work done by Microsoft locally as well as globally to provide information about how the Azure services comply with local government regulation. So in this particular instance, the GCIO has done a lot of work around defining a framework for risk and assurance around cloud services. Microsoft New Zealand has produced a paper. It's available for download at the Microsoft Trust Centre, which basically addresses all of the areas of the framework to demonstrate how the Microsoft services, Microsoft Azure services, can be used and comply with the framework. So very valuable resource and definitely worth a read if you're operating in this space in the government sector. So just taking a step a little bit deeper into what we are delivering. We are using Azure Data Factory for ingestion. So the data copy activity, I'm not sure whether many of you are familiar with Data Factory. It allows us to connect into a local data store through a data gateway, which is hosted within the firewall on-premise. We can then connect up to that data gateway, store credentials securely in the cloud, and then be able to call from the cloud services from Data Factory, extract the data out of the on-premise system up into the cloud, and have that scheduled. We then run that raw data through our own ETL process, our extract, transform, and load processes, to put it into a data mart format, and then expose that data up for Power BI through a tabular model for users to use and explore the data. An interesting point I'll make is that what the Azure services are allowing us to do is essentially size the infrastructure at the absolute bare minimum. So in this particular case, the data volumes aren't huge. We're talking about a couple of thousand kids with events associated with those kids, so not large data volumes. It means that we can go with relatively small services. So the SQL database instance, for instance, is I think it's S0 or S1, which has a very minimal cost associated with it. The data storage components are small, the compute is small, but it gives us that fantastic ability to actually scale. If and when we need to scale, we can easily scale up, scale down. Costs will obviously scale with it, but it allows us to keep it to a minimum. The other motivation behind using SQL DB as being a platform as a service. It means that Stand, which has an IT department of approximately 1, I think it is, to administer that database without having DBAs on board. All of the updates and upgrades are done within the service. So it's very compelling for a small organisation to be able to use those type of platform as services. What I'm showing you here are some wireframes that we actually use to help elicit some of the requirements. So one of the challenges working with these smaller organisations is that they don't necessarily have a good feel for what the possibilities are. So when we have a conversation about what will make a difference to your day with the management team, actually helping them to visualise what things might look like was really important. So what we did was we had a 2-day workshop with them, and during that workshop, we just sketched up these wireframes. Actually, they were done on a Surface tablet, just to give a feel and start to really understand what it is that they're trying to achieve and what they need to know as an organisation and as a management team. So what you're seeing here is really, the key things that are important to them is how much service are we providing, how many kids are in the program, what programs are we running, so what are the volumes looking like, and then how well are we doing, how are we measuring against the outcomes that we're actually providing these kids. So traditionally this would be done through their contract reporting, so they're contracted to Ministry of Social Development, and they obviously have terms of contract that they have to meet. That type of reporting is done on maybe twice a year, every 6 months or so. So they have traditionally they have a black hole until that reporting is pulled together. It's a very intensive process to pull it together every 6 months, and then it's provided out to the ministry. What we're trying to give them here is a daily view of how they're actually performing. So we've identified obviously how much, how well are we doing. So that's looking at time series, looking at trends. The other important aspect is what's going on today. So how do we look at the action-oriented work as well? So these are a relatively crude way of going about it, but it was very effective in eliciting the requirements and getting the team on board and understanding of what the possibilities might be. So I'll take you just to finish off, just some of the dashboards. So obviously there's a lot of infrastructure that sits behind this with Azure Data Factory and the database, but the nice dashboards is what everyone's interested in. So what you're seeing here is obviously quite different from those wireframes, and these have been developed in consultation. So wireframes were a starting point for us. What we've done is developed through iteratively with Power BI and work with the team to really understand what works for them, the layouts, the colours, all of those UX aspects. So here we're looking at the service delivery pipeline. So how much work is sitting in the pipeline, the exits and the referrals, with the ability to drill down into different regions, by genders, by different areas, and actually go to specific cases as well. This is new insight that they can't get today through their case management system. The case management system, that operational system is a case-by-case basis. Being able to see an aggregated view is quite a new concept. This second dashboard is looking at the prereqs. So when they actually have a child referred into the program, and once they're accepted into the program, each child needs to go through a set of prerequisites before they're ready to actually join the program. So the ability to actually track whether those prerequisites are actually being done, and they're being done in a timely fashion, is actually really important for the management team. Something that I'll point out here is that being able to see or visualise data in aggregate is also really valuable to identify how poor quality your data is. So if you have a look at the days to complete initial assessment, which has a large red bar up there, that would suggest that they're not closing off the initial assessments. Now that's not correct. We know that. We've been working with them to understand what that is. It simply means that the operational system hasn't had its final submit button clicked, the date submitted within it. So these dashboards are not only providing new insights, but they're actually allowing us to identify data quality issues within the source system, which means we can cycle back and sort that data out, which will flow through into these dashboards and improve the quality over time as well. And then finally, how do we measure how well we're doing? Here's an example of tests that they do, and this is focused on the looking at improvements over time. So what you're looking at here is in the lower chart are the outliers around student, parent, and teacher performance assessments. So they'll assess over a number of criteria on the right-hand side there. And they're looking for improvements across all of those. But importantly, they're also looking for the outliers. So these charts, what they're allowing them to do now, with the red, you can see the kids that perhaps aren't gaining improvement, that have either assessed themselves or the teachers assessed them or their parent has assessed them, that their behaviour is changing in a negative way. So we can now easily identify and drill down on those individuals and understand what's going on, what the specific issues are. We've got an aggregate view here. We click on the detail, we can go and have a look at that specific individual and do something about it. So this is incredibly powerful for the management team, and I think something that's really going to make a difference to them as an organisation. We're currently at the point of finalising our testing on this. We're about to roll it out. And I think it's going to make a massive difference to this organisation. What's really compelling for us is to be able to take the learnings that we've had with this initiative and working with Microsoft within the Public Cloud for Public Good program, and to be able to replicate that over and over again within our frontline services to ensure that money being spent in the New Zealand community is actually making a difference to our kids that are most vulnerable, but also to be able to take that globally, take it to other areas, other regions, and be able to replicate a similar thing. So we're very pleased as an organisation to be part of this program, and thank you very much to Microsoft New Zealand and Belinda in particular for allowing us to participate in this. And we're confident that, as I say, this will make a big difference to those most at risk in our communities. Thank you.
I can't stress enough, and I will say the point now is I'm really excited to represent Microsoft and to see the capabilities within the Microsoft Cloud being brought to bear on problems like these. None of this is possible without the talent and the specialist skills that exist in organisations like Stella and this room. I think for Microsoft to achieve the ambition that we have to enable the public cloud to really deliver some public good is very dependent on you, and we ultimately would love to encourage more and more individuals and organisations to get involved in supporting organisations like STAND and kind of being able to build capability like this and really deliver services in really positive ways to vulnerable New Zealanders. Now, I just wanted to give you before we finish up today is just a little bit of insight into the suite of products that are available to non-profits globally and here in New Zealand for free or as a discount. And over the last couple of years, the suite of offerings has grown quite significantly. Currently, there are a number of those products that are available as a pure donation. Office 365 is a good example of that, as is Power BI. The others, and Windows 10, the others have a discount, a significant discount applied, and all of them are really being actively consumed by the non-profit sector here in New Zealand at the moment. About a month ago, I mentioned that we brought Azure onto the program, and we now make grants, consumption grants, available to non-profits. They're valued annually at about $5,000 worth of consumption, and based on what Travis was saying earlier about the volumes of data that they're using with regards to the STAND project, we believe that actually in most instances that sort of consumption is probably going to be about right for most organisations in New Zealand. Of course, the larger ones will be consuming more over time. So if you are working with a non-profit organisation, or if you're seeking to work with a non-profit organisation, there is a process organisations need to go through to avail of the program. Most of the information, well, all of the information is available at the URL up here, microsoft.com/nonprofits. The first thing that we do is ensure that we validate organisations are eligible for our program. And I would suggest in New Zealand, I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of organisations. The first prerequisite being that they need to be registered with the Charities Commission. So once their eligibility has been checked, they need to sign up to have that validated. And once that's been validated, they can essentially view the programs and begin to consume those programs overnight. The process itself. Today, maybe not in the early days, wasn't quite so straightforward, but today I'm really pleased to say it is. So on that note, I'm actually going to close, and again, thank you for taking the time to come in and listen to our presentation this morning. As I mentioned, and I will say it again, the talent within our industry is really significant, and not enough of it is being really consumed to ensure that we have real benefit in the communities that we work. The opportunity is really huge, and I hope today we have given you just a small appetite for how potentially you and your organisations may be able to use some of your talent and also the power of our cloud to have a beneficial impact in our communities. And on that note, I'm just going to open it up to the floor for any questions, and I'll maybe ask Travis to join me. So please, if anyone has any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them now.
Yes.
Yes, sorry. That is a very, very good question. And again, Microsoft's philanthropy efforts do land differently in different markets for the very reasons you've talked about. And I was only just saying to Travis a little bit earlier, I think where we're very fortunate in New Zealand too is that we have the partner community that really is able to bring some of these solutions to life. But some of the issues you've talked to around power and connectivity, they're very real issues in our region, but also in other regions around the world. Probably the first thing I do is draw your attention to, within the philanthropy program, we have another specific program of work that is very much dedicated to building infrastructure in some of those environments. And but some of that technology, I mean, I'll give you one example, is the application of TV white spaces technology. And I'm not a technologist, I'm just looking around the room to see if anyone has any insight into it. I'm not going to talk you through the details, except to say that the technology allows you to be able to use the TV, what do you call it? Yeah, to be able to transmit data. And that's being applied, actually, I think one of my earliest slides actually showed, let me say, I think this was a community in which, sorry, it's being applied. And so that is one initiative. I think probably when your question about some of the particular software and the ability to make that a little bit lighter, unfortunately that's not something I have the knowledge to be able to comment on. It sounds like a significantly good idea. I will say, however, that we're really fortunate at this time in Microsoft's history to have a chief executive who I think, comes from a country that experiences those challenges. He understands intimately some of those particular problems and is hugely committed to this piece of work. I've worked in this role now for several years, and I feel hugely optimistic about the new ways that Microsoft will be investing to ensure we do meet that mission we have set for ourselves as an organisation, which essentially says that to achieve our mission, we really need to be able to bring that capability to every single community in the world and overcome some of the barriers you've identified. Sorry, that was probably a long-winded answer to you.
Does Microsoft in this program or yourself personally work mostly in New Zealand, or do you work with some organisations that are international?
So globally, Microsoft, I'm part of a global philanthropies team. My work is dedicated here in New Zealand. So we do work with a few organisations who work in the Pacific Islands as well. But yes, so we have capability, we have a dedicated resource in the majority of countries now. I think to some degree that is a signal too about our commitment in this particular area. We aim to we currently are supporting about 70,000 organisations annually around the world. Most of those are not necessarily using the capability of the cloud at the moment, but that is certainly our ambition. And I'm in the fortunate position, as are a number of my colleagues, in really working to try and achieve that mission. Maybe if there are no other questions then, we'll finish. Thank you very much again for joining Travis and I today. Cheers.